Okay. I think we've got the green light to start. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our talk, Destination Data, Unpacking Traveler Insights with LLMs. Hope you managed to enjoy some of the Californian sunshine. What we're about to take you through, actually first, by way of introductions. My name is Gaziz. I'm a data science lead at Redkite. Redkite works with a variety of organizations, clients across a lot of sectors as their data change partner. So we help them on their journey, on their data journey, anything from data strategy all the way through implementation and build. And we are Databricks partners, and we've recently been acquired by Accenture. What we're going to talk to you about today is one of my clients within the travel and hospitality sector for which we built this solution. But first, Sonia.
Yeah, hi everyone, nice to see you all. First, can I just check, are you able to hear us okay? Okay, lots of thumbs, thank you.
Awesome.
So I'm Sonia, and I'm the Generative AI lead at Redkite, where my team specialize in producing scalable solutions, utilizing the latest and greatest open source models via the Databricks platform. And nice to see you all here to join us.
Awesome. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to set the scene as to what's happening within the travel industry. And we had the pandemic, right? A big bang event, major disruptor for the travel industry. All travel stopped for a while. And as travel picked back up, some of the pre-pandemic patterns that we've seen are no longer there. Whether that regression to the mean will happen eventually, I think is an open question. But the point is, travel patterns are changing. And even if we ignore the pandemic, there's lots of other macro trends, right? So you've got climate change, meaning that maybe potentially previously popular destinations are now getting a little bit too hot. Maybe people are looking for coolcations, something a bit cooler in the summer side. Maybe people are looking to travel more often in spring and fall, which aren't traditional travel seasons. You've also got demographics changes, right? Life expectancy is increasing throughout. What does that mean? So people are traveling more into old age. What does that mean for that cohort? Essentially, the message, the takeaway is that travel companies need to be up to date and they need to understand what's happening out there so that they could pivot most effectively. And the way they stay on top of things is with data. And there's a lot of really useful data out there. You've got mobility data, things on like traveler footfall. You've got spend data from credit card companies, who's spending what, when. You've got flight ticket information. You've got data on short-term rentals, so hotel stays, Airbnb type stays, and so on. But ultimately, all of that data is really only ever going to be a proxy for why people travel. You're going to have to make some sort of inferential leap to understand the decisions behind why they travel. The thing that really gets at the core of why people travel is only ever going to be direct feedback. So direct primary research that often happens through kind of surveys outsourced to market research companies, et cetera. But that data comes with a challenge, which is that open-ended responses are very difficult to analyze. So you end up having kind of just using the multiple choice questions that you really bring into your lake and then do analytics with. You kind of leave open-ended resources on the table, not really, maybe occasionally on an ad hoc basis, someone will review them, but that's the challenge that the industry is looking to solve. Now, specifically within the context of my client, just to kind of recap what their mission is and how did they go about it, they're aiming to increase the number of tourists coming to the destinations that they look after and using their services. One of the ways that they do that is through advertising campaigns. So they run ad campaigns across a variety of markets to try to entice people to come, get people to come and engage with that, whatever the destination has to offer. And to measure campaign effectiveness and then be able to plan future campaigns better, they run these surveys, right? A variety of surveys like brand awareness, brand perception, sentiment, and so on. And those surveys generate vast volumes of free text responses. Again, the barrier to getting the most out of those surveys is that it's an incredibly manual task. So if it's done, it's probably done on an ad hoc basis. And sort of too late to actually affect any change. So the window that you have to be able to actually take those responses, get the insights that you want, and tweak your future campaign is pretty short. It's no good having, and travel is a very seasonal industry. It's no good having insights that are kind of a year out of date, by that point obsolete. And the other thing is, if you ask someone to review manually free text responses, we're all human. One answer is going to stick out to us more than another. It's not a consistent way of approaching. You probably get the general gist, but you're not approaching the analysis in a consistent way like a data science model can. So what we wanted to do with our client is to find a solution that streamlines this really labor-intensive process, helps understand tourism sentiment better, and ultimately design more effective marketing strategies. Sonia is going to touch on some of the issues that we've seen with the survey data sets.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Gaziz. So as Gaziz mentioned, I'm going to go into a little bit more about the specific challenges our client face, specifically with survey responses, and I'll also touch on some elements as to why the set challenges made us what we had to then take into account when looking to build out our solution. So number one is that it's a very labor-intensive process. What typically is involved when having to review multiple free text responses to surveys is that you have a lot of manual labor there to read through masses and massive amounts of answers and then understand what is the sentiment that tourist is saying or whoever is responding to the survey to begin with. So it takes days of effort. And on top of this, it means that there's a delay to insights. So if you can imagine, you've got a set team going through all these responses, analyzing it, coming up with summaries as to how they feel tourists, the sentiment they felt towards a campaign. That takes a long time. Then that can't impact the next campaigns. It would have to impact campaigns in the following season or maybe even up to a year later. So we need a solution that was able to bring out insights almost instantaneously to then be added into the future and upcoming iterations of marketing campaigns. Next, we have non-informative responses, and I'm sure many of us here, if not all, can be subject to when you're filling out a questionnaire and you just want to get through the next question, so you put in any old words to some questions. I see a few nodding heads, and sometimes you'll put in one-word answer or you'll put not applicable just to get through to the next question. So this results in a lot of invaluable responses that was collected. And for our solution, if we have a lot of noise like that, it obviously pushes up compute costs. So there was a need to be able to filter out these responses so that you're lowering down those compute costs. Next, our client specifically had an emerging data capability. So we understand that, yes, whilst there are solutions out there globally that do this in more of a, oh, sorry, is my speaker okay? Yeah. In more of an out-of-box solution, they come with a lots of whistles and bells, lots of whistles and bells, and they can be very shiny, but this didn't necessarily actually align to what our client's data journey was. We needed to be able to take into account and build a tool that aligned to their roadmap and where they see themselves in their data vision. So something that was applicable, but maybe not super complex and needing loads of speciality and SME knowledge. Next, there's multi-language complexity. Again, with it being travel and tourism industry and hospitality, you are going to have tourists and people responding to the surveys from a global perspective, and they, generally speaking, are going to answer in their primary language. So for this instance, we needed all the responses to be translated to English, so that raised the issue of needing to have a translation process in place for the solution as well. Next, a challenge was unreliable pre-coded responses. So this is where you have a drop-down list of, let's say, a set 5 or 10 predefined answers. And again, I'm sure we can all have some sort of experience when answering a questionnaire. You have to select an answer. You don't necessarily align to any one in particular, but you have to answer it. So you just put in any old one. And this just leads to, again, some inaccurate and potentially sometimes some biased responses as well that's collected from the survey. And finally, and arguably most importantly, challenge of untapped insights. Now, there's a big thing about most organizations focus heavily on structured data. That's all good and well, but you do have this vast amount of unstructured data there, and because it has historically been so difficult for organizations to extract insights or invaluable insights from unstructured data, this has left all of this on the table. And so there's just a struggle to really gain nuanced perspectives and understand the tourist sentiments that's going on. And we wanted to be able to pull that together with structured data to be able to give a more holistic view for our client.
Awesome. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to outline the journey that we're hopefully going to take you on throughout the remainder of this talk, which is first we'll touch on the what we did. Then we'll briefly cover some of the how we did it, so the technical enablers that made this possible. And then we'll pull it back out to the so what. So what does that mean? What does it mean for the client? And actually, what does it mean for these kind of free text survey data sets all in all? So our client had, it does a variety of surveys, but one of the surveys they had sourced to a market research company is around brand tracking. So it's picking up things like brand awareness, brand perception. How do people feel about certain campaigns that they run? How do people feel about certain destinations they advertise as a result of those campaigns? What do they think when they think about holidays in general? That sort of thing. I think Sonia is going to take you through some example questions.
Yeah, so we've got some examples here. For instance, firstly, please tell us in your own words why you are unlikely to consider X destination for a holiday or leisure break. And now the answer here was because it is difficult to obtain a visa. Short, sweet, and simple, get straight to the point, you understand what the tourist is saying. Another one, list the first words that come to mind when thinking about a holiday or short leisure trip. As you can see, there are a few bullet points there. Again, pretty short, understanding more or less what is attracting them to the campaign, but not necessarily the sentiment levels. Next, in the context of a holiday or short leisure trip, what does the word adventure mean to you? Starting to pull out a bit more of those lengthier answers and understanding that what you're trying to look at and trying to pull and understand the sentiment for the tourist there. And then finally, and now this is one that we're going to focus on for the rest of our talk, but it's please now describe overall how the campaign made you feel about said destination. And this is the ones mentioned we're going to drive throughout the presentation, but just to give you a flavor for the types of questions that we're seeing in the surveys that needed to be analyzed. And as you can see, the example answer here is that you can do lots in the country, you can check out the sites, and the ad and campaign was very personal. They liked it. It took the cliches and reinterpreted it to be more funny. So now we had the what's our solution, what are we trying to build? And then the first thing came, well, when we're looking to build it, how do we want to build it? Do we want to go with LLMs, or do we want to go with traditional NLP? LLMs being large language models and NLP being natural language processing. So after much consideration, we decided to go with LLMs for 3 key reasons. Number one, it's the time to deploy. LLMs are pretty much an out-of-the-box solution. So it allows you to realistically, without any additional training, you can just start to implement them. And also there are lower barriers to entry in a sense that you don't need to have the specific SME skill set there that you need for NLP tasks. For instance, for NLP, you need to have SMEs who are able to train each individual model to be very specific to the task at hand. You don't necessarily need that for LLM, so it reduces the time to deploy as you're not having to rely on having the SMEs available and there. Next, we have reusability. So for LLMs, generally speaking, you can have one model that does a lot of tasks well, very well. Whereas for NLP methods, you have one model that does one task extremely well, but you need to have multiple models doing multiple tasks. So there's a lot there, and everything needs to be trained specifically to that task at hand. So the ability to have LLMs means that you can reuse this for multiple different use cases across text analytics, and you're not limited to only having what that one model is trained to do. And lastly, we have summarization. And so this is because LLMs can leverage that understanding of content, semantics, and relationships across extensive texts that they learned during their pre-training, and they generate coherent and contextually relevant summaries without having to rely on any, again, predefined rules or even just using simple extraction techniques. So taking all these three reasons into account is why we decided to actually go ahead and start to implement an LLM-based solution. Now we have the fact that we're going to use LLMs. Let's start talking a little bit about the actual, like starting to implement them into a brand survey campaign. So as Gaziz mentioned before, these were used more to actually analyze the campaigns, and the survey responses happen in about a 4 to 6 week cadence.
Yeah, that's right.
And so for an average, if we take the facts and figures for an average survey wave, we have about 1,900 respondents, of which there are 7 free text answers per survey. And now a respondee can answer one of these questions multiple times, because they can answer, for instance, if it's how did the campaign make you feel about X destination, you can add different answers to add different elements to the question at hand. So this left just shy of 30,000 free text answers that needed to be responded to. So at this point, again, as we mentioned, when you've got travel and tourism industry, you have tourists globally, they are responding in their primary language. So this is the point at which we have all the answers. It needs to undergo the translation process. At this point, roughly just over 50% of the answers are then translated into English. And then finally, we try to figure out what the relevant responses are. So as mentioned a few slides prior, when you have those non-informative responses, we really want to filter out the noise because we want to lower down the compute costs. So we have the model, we show the model and use a few shot prompting to be able to teach the model how to dictate how relevant a response is. So it will say whether a response is excellent, vague, poor, or useless, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a couple slides' time. But just for facts and figures here, anything that is mentioned as poor or useless is filtered out to really bring down the compute costs and make it a much more cohesive solution and process going forward. So an example survey response here, and I do apologize to any German natives or German speakers in the audience for my accent, but we have an example survey response of Mir fällt nichts ein, which translated to I can't think of anything, as you can imagine, was given a relevancy score of useless because it doesn't really give any insights for the actual sentiment of the tourist. Now, I know we've gone through an example of a useless response that is filtered out. If we looked at an actual response that is marked as potentially excellent or vague, we have this response. So a quirky and fun style of advertising that I really like. On the other hand, festivals, graffiti do very little for me, and the second part of the ad would suit me better since it refers more to nature. This filtered through as one of the ones that are relevant to actually start to analyze, and we can look at the different steps involved. So if I turn, I can't hear me. So first we have sentiment analysis, and this is where the model decides whether the response is a positive, negative, conflicted, or neutral, and gives a -1 to 1 score, -1 being negative and 1 being positive. So as you can see, the model here chose that the sentiment, the overall sentiment for the response is positive, which, yeah, generally makes sense. Lots of positive things mentioned in the response. Then we have emotion classification, where the model decides what is it, or how emotive, what the kind of emotions are the tourists feeling here. And it's chosen joy, which again seems to track on trend. They're saying it's quirky, fun style, and they really like it. Yeah, generally sounds pretty joyous.
And then we did a couple other things, right? Topic extraction and classification. I'll just touch on the difference between those. We, before doing topic classification and having predefined kind of buckets that we want to allocate or rather pull out the response into, we wanted to give the LLM free rein to think, what do you think the topic of the response was about? So we asked it to extract like the 3 most relevant topics as it sees it. And then we sat down with the business and basically using their domain knowledge, look through that list thinking, okay, what are the actual relevant 7 or 8 buckets that we can group all of this into, and then do topic classification on those buckets so that in the aggregate, you kind of enable that really powerful analytics. And we don't see the extraction here. I would presume it would be something like festivals, like graffiti maybe. But the classification topics are, we've got the ad, culture, things to do. And the numbers that you see in the parentheses, we also asked the LLM to output the prevalence of the said topic. So if you imagine a long open-ended response, it might be like a really long rant about the weather being awful, and then just offhand comment about, yeah, but the price was good though. And it wouldn't be fair to then say that, you know, weather and price are kind of equal parts topics mentioned in the topic, in the response. So we just wanted to make sure that we have a way of weighting the prevalence of the topics. And then what we did is actually extract topic level sentiment, meaning you've got your overall response level sentiment, which may be positive, but for example, this, you know, the culture-wise, the fact that this person isn't a fan of festivals and graffiti, actually, even though their response to the ad was positive, their response to the culture aspect of it all wasn't. And I think it's important to get that differentiation. And if you think about all of these data points that we extract, we basically run every single response through the LLMs to parse these out, and they're all feeding into your gold layer tables, your fact response, dim respondents, and so on. I think you've got a slightly more critical one.
Yeah, I do, because it's all well and good having a really nice response, but as we all know, there are critiques that are out there in the world, and actually they're the responses that we really want to drill down into, because you want to understand what your audience and tourists and customers, consumers across the industry, what everyone is feeling, what they like, what they don't like, and then how you can change the elements that they don't like to impact campaigns in the future. So critical response here, we have, I didn't need the floating distracting head. X country has so much to offer. Quirky floating heads are not going to sell it to me. Price will always win here. And as you can see, our models have picked out that it is, generally speaking, a negative review. Lots of parts of this were pretty negative, but the point being here is that they really want to be able to understand more about price. So taking this into future iterations of marketing campaigns, they want to be able to, we can feed this back to the marketing team to say, look, in future campaigns, why don't you just add more elements around price and make that be the main topic here, and just add more, is it affordable, or is this a luxury, or is it cheap, or whatever it may be. That's what needs to happen in the future elements, and maybe not necessarily having floating heads or interesting graphics there.
Cool.
Okay, back over to you.
Cheers. All right, sorry, apologies for the smallness of the text here. I'll just verbally cover this, but just to point out how simple asking an LLM to do something really is. It's just about deriving the right prompt. And essentially with few-shot prompting, we managed to get really decent results. And I'll touch on how we approached evaluation a bit later, but ultimately, on the left, we've got the prompt for the relevancy scoring, on the right for classifying the sentiment polarity. It's essentially, you are expert such and such, here's your task, here's the scoring criteria, how you should do it, and here are some examples of what a useless response is, what a vague response is, and so on. And it's surprisingly good at being able to get the output right. Okay, so those are the things, the LLM tasks that we did at individual response level, but then we also, I think summarization is a really interesting topic in the field of LLMs. We wanted to see whether we can do some cool summaries, right? So if you imagine for any given campaign, there'll be some responses that talk about its affordability, other responses that talk about what that campaign made people feel about nature, and so on and so on. We wanted to get topic level summaries for a campaign, meaning we pass all the responses that mention a given topic associated with that campaign to the LLM, and we ask it to produce a summary. And this is what it does, right? So if you just want to understand what do people think about affordability when it comes to that campaign, that's the one paragraph you have to read. But then the other thing we did is we passed those summaries to the LLM to ask it to produce a summary of summaries, so that you just have a single paragraph that at a campaign level can tell you everything that kind of people feel, right? So if nothing else, all that the business has to do is read that one single paragraph per campaign. So really trying to cut down the time that they need and give them the insight when it's actually actionable before their next campaign planning begins. Cool. So just wanted to touch on evaluation, because I think we'd be remiss not to. It's a really important topic in the field. It's awesome seeing a lot of best practice emerging around it, and actually Databricks driving a lot of that. And it's also kind of a segue to why doing this in Databricks made it so easy. Just Sonia will touch on that in a bit more detail. But basically, we had 3 paradigm approaches available to us. Exact match, where you've got a labeled ground truth data set that you need to match against, your LLM's output has to match against, and then it's up to the business to define, is 90% good enough? Is 80% good enough? We work together and kind of build that trust and make sure that they have that ownership over what is good enough or not. And you've got human in the loop, which is essentially having someone manually review the LLM's output and say if it's good or not. And then you've got LLM as a judge, which is a nice in-between, which is basically your LLM's output is judged by another LLM, and then you test that judge LLM on a sample data set to see if you're happy with the way it's judging, and if you are, that the judge is valid, and you kind of let it run on the full data set. So broadly, we've got these 2 dimensions that they're up against, right? Cost and flexibility. Human in the loop, most flexible, most costly, because it's people time. Exact match, least cost, least flexibility. You only ever need to produce that labeled data set once. But then once it's there, you don't really want to be relabeling, so it's not really flexible. Essentially, other than relevancy scoring, which is the very first activity, and summarization, we evaluated everything using LLM as a judge, and it was surprisingly effective. So the relevancy scoring, we knew it's just a score of 1 useless to 4 excellent. It's pretty straightforward to label each response, and because we needed to do it just the one time to filter out everything that isn't very useful, we thought it's worth investing time to doing the labeling. And summarization is just really difficult to avoid having a human component to it. Okay, so touching on how Databricks really supports here. This is the kind of reference conceptual architecture. I'm not going to go into it in detail. What I will touch on is 2 things. So we started this data transformation journey with our clients just under 2 years ago. So the client had a really strong vision of where they want their data to be and how do they want everything around data to work. And we set out to figure out what data technology architecture would best support that. And we did a proper data technology architecture assessment, shortlisted, reviewed some of the options, and ultimately Databricks won out for a couple of reasons. And I think that the strongest reason is the credibility of Databricks' future roadmap. We have a lot of trust that any relevant features that we might need will be available on Databricks in a timely fashion. And rightly so, right? LLMs are a very new field, and we're also already able to do this just 1.5 years into our journey. And second reason is the kind of open source first modular approach to everything and that they do. But I think in this solution, where this Databricks really shined is during development, made it so much easier. So, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as Gaziz mentioned, we'll go through a little bit of the value specifically for building out the solution. So number 1, we've got Unity Catalog, and this just enabled our team to be able to store data and segment data in a more streamlined manner. Also allows for enabling of permission-based access and really allows our users to query data or prod data from dev environments more seamlessly. Next, we have the fact that MLflow is integrated within Databricks, which, for instance, for this task at hand, we were able to have experiment view, which was used to compare results and have that side-by-side comparison when evaluating model building. And as Gaziz mentioned a few slides prior, we have the ability to do LLM as a judge, which was also made available through MLflow, and it's a low-code way to evaluate data at scale. And again, as Gaziz mentioned just recently, the fact that Databricks moves at such pace and it's at the forefront of innovation, constantly new features are being built out, there's new elements all the time, and we want to be able to use that. So an example here was external endpoint support. Now, for future iterations, we would use this, but just to give you an element of how fast Databricks move, from us completing the solution to creating this presentation, external endpoint only became available then. So I think it was about in April time. But just to show that we use Databricks to be able to use and iterate on and really incorporate all the latest and greatest of technology. External endpoint is just really easy for switching between models. It can create inference logging tables, allows prompt engineers to be able to engineer from UI rather than from notebooks, and then this just really lowers the barriers needed to build code.
Awesome. All right, so we touched on the what and the how. Now to the so what. So why is it really powerful having these response level fields extracted out of the data, right? What's so good about having sentiment at the response level, topic level sentiment, and so on? So the cool thing about it is the analytics possibilities that it opens up in the aggregate. So for one, you've got trend analysis. For example, you can start looking at how many of my responses mention affordability and in what context, with what sentiment. And if you look at that over time and you see that actually affordability is trending up, more and more responses mention that, clearly price is becoming more of a consideration. You combine that with sentiment. Are you seeing a growth in negative sentiment? What does that tell you? Does that mean that your ad is doing something that's not emphasizing that the destination you're trying to advertise is actually affordable? There are affordable options. Does that tell you that maybe you need to target a different audience, one with more disposable income? Whatever it may be, right? You actually get actionable insight there. The other thing that it allows is you don't get these things in a vacuum. You also get a lot of other relevant information that you have on your respondents, like the market that they're from, the population segment they're assigned to, campaign that they've seen, etc. And you can start diving deeper to ask and answer really cool questions. So for example, you look at sentiment on weather and you see it's overwhelming negative overall. But then you break that down by market and you start looking, okay, are German tourists and American tourists perceiving weather in the same way? And if yes, okay, maybe there's something up with the weather, right? Or maybe therefore our ads need to address that somehow, emphasize that there are sunny spots or how you can avoid it, right? And if no, maybe that points to local cultural factors and creating a single one-size-fits-all campaign is not appropriate. You need to target locally differently. That's the other thing you can do. And last but not least, it supports with better segmentation. Every business, and our client is an exception, has a clear segmentation of an understanding of the segments that the customer base forms. So for our client specifically, I think you've got buzz seekers, cultural buffs, a couple of others, right? What this helps you do is validate whether those segments are correct, because ultimately segments drive a lot of marketing activity, because the perception is that's my customer segments, I know what they are, I know what they like, and I'm gonna cater towards them. Through this, you're able to validate if that's actually the case, or if you're seeing new clusters emerge. For example, looking just at those responses and the topics that are mentioned, can you maybe see a rise in ecotourists or revenge travelers? By the way, someone pointed out to me, what's a revenge traveler? Apparently, it's when, so after COVID, people are trying to get in as much travel as they can. For whatever reason, they're called revenge travelers. But ultimately, can you see new segments popping up, and can you therefore cater to them and advertise to them more effectively? So all of this, that's not on the slide, but all of this leads to a better fundamental understanding of your target audience, which in turn leads to more impactful campaign design.
Thank you. I can definitely agree that I am a revenge traveler myself. So just coming and bringing this all into conclusion. So what value does the solution actually bring? Well, it's giving time back to businesses because, again, as mentioned before, historically this was a very slow, arduous, and long process because you need to have the manual labor in place to be able to actually read through the massive amounts of survey responses. So this just allows, if you're automating all this process out, it allows to give time back to employees to do more value add activities. Next, we have richer and timelier insights, and this is because your LLMs are being able to pull out additional insights from sentiment, emotions, and topics mentioned, and then using this to uncover patterns within the data to support decision making. But also, the ability to be able to pull out insights in the now and inform future campaigns, but not talking future in terms of next year, we're talking future in terms of weeks. That enables the campaigns to then be adapted to really make sure that they are impacting or having the right impact for the audience at hand. So, which leads on to our final point on higher return on investment on campaigns. If you are able to adapt your campaigns to really have what your audience are looking for, then naturally they're going to resonate more with the campaign, and they are going to invest more in terms of their time and actually following through, watching the campaign, listening to what it has, and then potentially going forward and visiting the destination at hand. So that's really a kind of a holistic view as to the value that a solution brings in general. And then Gaziz will go into, or for our client anyway, and then Gaziz will go into the value of survey responses in general.
Yeah, so this is for our client, but ultimately, if you think about it, marketing is an industry agnostic function, and the need to understand your customers happens everywhere. Everyone's going to be doing some sort of market research. Everyone's going to be having some sort of survey data set. This all still applies, and we see LLMs really impacting the future of surveys in a couple of ways. In 3 ways. One, they make surveys have broader appeal. If you know that you've got this simple tool available to analyze survey data sets, you're going to start asking more free text questions. They're going to make surveys more relevant. It's going to become a standard tool in marketing's toolkit. 2 is simpler and faster survey design, because you're not as reliant on getting the pre-coded kind of multiple choice possible answers just right. You can have more open-ended text questions. It's not a panacea, right? I'm sure you've opened a survey, seen open-ended response, and you're like, nah. So it's not gonna replace those kinds of drop-down questions entirely, but it's a helpful addition. And then if you think about some of the other capabilities that are being developed right now, like speech-to-text, eventually we're probably not going to even see forms that you have to fill out, right? Someone will come up to you and ask you to riff on something for a couple of minutes, right? What do you feel about this destination? All of that audio file then gets converted to text, and then you run it through those LLM tasks, just like here, making it much, much simpler to get to insight. And lastly, those surveys combined with everything else that you have on your customers, their purchase patterns, within the travel context, the ticket sales, et cetera, you're gonna get a really holistic 360 view understanding of your customer base, and are going to be able to tweak and adjust your business model, your campaigns effectively. All right.
And so last but not least, wanted to say a thank you to everyone for joining. We hope you enjoyed the talk just as much as we enjoyed prepping and presenting it. If you want to hear more about our generative AI solutions, or even just Redkite solutions in general, please do feel free to either grab either myself or Gaziz just after this talk, or email us. Our work emails are on the screen as well. We are both here until Friday, so if you do feel like wanting to grab us for an additional talk or for a drink at any point, do let us know. Feel free to grab us. My preferred drink of choice is a passion fruit mojito, but take that as you will. And then we've got a QR code here, so please feel free to scan this. This is for a number of thought leaderships that Redkite have produced in the technology sphere, some of which include a couple of white papers which have industry-specific Gen AI use cases, about just over 30, I think, for each. So feel free to give that a scan. And yeah, thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.